Phase 4 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe had its issues. I think most MCU fans, even the ones that love the majority of the projects in Phase 4, can agree that Phase 4 was not nearly as strong as Phases 1 through 3 of the MCU, known as the Infinity Saga. As Marvel kicked off its multiverse saga, things got off to a little bit of a rocky start, and I think that they're still trying to recover from that. Hopefully they still can, but I think that it's fair to say some mistakes were made. So in part 2 of this 3-part video series where I do a retrospective on Phase 4 after having individually rewatched every single project in the MCU Phase 4, you can check out each individual video on the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel. I will be discussing in today's video how I would fix the MCU Phase 4. This is the first half of that endeavor. So I'm going to be discussing first 8 projects in my version of the MCU Phase 4, and in part 3 of this video series, I'm going to be discussing the second 8 of the MCU Phase 4. What is my basis for doing this? Well, you can check out part 1 of this 3-part video series on the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel where I discuss 6 key lessons that I believe we can take away. So if you want to check out what I think are the 6 key takeaways and lessons that we can learn, then check out that video on the YouTube channel. And really this thought exercise of rebuilding the MCU Phase 4 from my own perspective, as if I were the one in control, is built around those 6 criteria. So make sure to check out part 1 on the YouTube channel right now. Also, make sure to subscribe to the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel. Like I mentioned before, this is only part 2 of 3. I'm going to be discussing the first 8 out of 16 projects in the MCU Phase 4, and then part 3 will be discussing the next 8. So subscribe, stay tuned to the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel, and comment down below with what you think of my redone MCU Phase 4. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Alright, before we get into it any further, I'd like to set some ground rules here. Like I mentioned before, I'm using the criteria from part 1, but also that I'm keeping all 16 projects intact that I had previously rewatched. So all 16 live-action MCU Phase 4 projects that Marvel had actually released, I am keeping all of those, and I'm adding or subtracting nothing. So no random Iron Man 4s or Avengers 5s in here, not right now at least, because I'm trying to work with what Kevin Feige actually gave us. In terms of what I'm actually changing, I'm going to try to keep the content of each movie and show as close to the original as possible. However, I'm going to be taking creative liberties and adding things here or there, subtracting things here or there as I see fit. This is entirely subjective, so if you disagree with me taking out a subplot of a certain film or adding something in, let me know in the comments down below. It is all speculation, it is all a thought exercise, and I'd love to talk about it with you guys in the comments. Also of note, I'm going to be shuffling around release dates, so things are going to be a little bit out of order. I'm going to be discussing the first 8, but these first 8 are not the first 8 that were released in chronological order in the actual Phase 4 timeline. These have been moved around very strategically by me to set up a narrative that I think will be satisfying. And finally, yes, movies can become shows, and shows can become movies. That is absolutely on the table. Alright, now that we set the ground rules, let's get into the first 8 projects in my MCU Phase 4. The first project to release in my MCU Phase 4 is The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And right off the bat, there are already going to be some significant changes because it was a 6-episode series, but I am moving it to a movie. I am changing The Falcon and the Winter Soldier to a movie and retitling it Captain America: Brave New World. Obviously, this is the title of the actual Captain America 4, but I think it is more appropriate to have The Falcon and the Winter Soldier turn into Captain America 4. In terms of actual changes, I would take out the Zemo subplot entirely. As much as I love Daniel Brühl in the role, I just don't think he was that necessary. I would make Sharon Carter the main villain of this movie, and I would restructure it so that the Flag Smashers are the secondary villains, because I think that Sharon Carter already has plenty of motivation enough after being displaced and on the run after Captain America Civil War. So I think that she would work as a very fine, solid Captain America villain for Sam Wilson. Bucky Barnes is also a secondary character in this. I don't necessarily think that we have enough room in a movie to explore this character as heavily as we would with Falcon, Sam Wilson, because I would also like to keep everything with Isaiah Bradley. I think that thematically, that is a great through line to go through with Captain America, Sam Wilson finally picking up the shield at the end of the movie for good and being the Captain America of the new phase. I think this would be a great way to start off the new multiverse saga because now you have your established Captain America. The finale would be fairly similar. It would still take place in New York, but this time it would be Sam versus Sharon Carter. I know Sharon Carter doesn't have superpowers, but then again, so does Sam. Sam doesn't have superpowers either, so I think it would work out well in that regard. And you could have a Bucky versus Flag Smashers kind of thing going on the side as well as your B subplot. As for what the post-credit scenes would be, or at least what the ending would tease, I would want to tease the Thunderbolts because I think Bucky Barnes is a great addition to the Thunderbolts. You can have US Agent in there, although I don't think that there's as much space in here for US Agent, and honestly, it doesn't really matter if he shows up in Thunderbolts in my version. But you can set up Bucky Barnes and Zemo in the post-credit scenes if you would like. That's a great way to bring back Daniel Brühl. And I also want to set up a new Avengers team. Right off the bat, first project of Phase 4, I want to set up the fact that Captain America, Sam Wilson, after he is establishing himself as Captain America, is going to look for the new Avengers and try to recruit the team. You can talk about how the fact that after Endgame, the Avengers disbanded, but I want Captain America to start out Phase 4 by immediately trying to form a new team in light of the events of Captain America Brave New World. The second project in my MCU Phase 4 is WandaVision, so restructuring just a little bit to move WandaVision second after the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, although I do believe that that was the initial plan, but anyways, making WandaVision second now. Some very minor changes in terms of the structure. I would change it from a 9-episode show to a 10-episode show, and this is very strategic because I want to take one extra episode to flesh out Agatha Harkness. I believe personally that one of the weaker parts of the show was Agatha's character. I think that Kathryn Hahn gave a very charismatic performance, but the character itself did not have the development that I would have liked. So I would like to take one entire episode, maybe interspersing with Wanda a little bit, but take one entire episode to develop Agatha's character so that we have a bigger punch in the finale. I would also replace Evan Peters with Aaron Taylor Johnson. Honestly, I think that that would have more impact for Wanda seeing this version of the character that she knows her brother to be in the Hex. I think that that would make more of an impact. And honestly, I would just take out the Ralph subplot as well. I think that it's fine enough to have Aaron Taylor Johnson play a sort of reanimated version of Quicksilver that is puppeted by Agatha. I think that that would be just as emotionally powerful for Wanda to see. And finally, I've rewatched WandaVision. I still maintain that they were hinting at something way bigger with the aerospace engineer, whether they intended to or not. Just get rid of that. Just say that Monica has some friend that is going to help them out. As for setup at the end, I do like the Doctor Strange 2 tease. Keep that there. I like that. Make sure that Wanda is experimenting with the Darkhold, and we are all golden. Now let's deviate a little bit with the third project. I said I was going to keep every single project in the MCU Phase 4, and I technically am going to do that, but I'm going to make one tiny little exception here, and the third project is Black Widow. I'm talking about Black Widow third because WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier came before Black Widow in our reality, in our release schedule. And, hint, hint, wink, wink, I'm going to be moving Loki to a later spot, so it's a good time to talk about Black Widow, but in my version of Phase 4, Black Widow actually would not release in Phase 4. It would release in Phase 3. I know this is cheating, but I believe looking at Black Widow as a project that this would be best for it, and it would still help set up other things in Phase 4. So I'm going to make one little exception here and say Black Widow, still a movie, by the way, is going to release in 2016 between Civil War and Doctor Strange. Couple little things here and there that I would change. First of all, I would make Dreykov's daughter much more of a sympathetic character who actually talks and does things rather than have Dreykov be the one talking. I would have her be a much more sympathetic villain. And then I would focus a lot more on Yelena and the family. I think that that one scene at the dinner table is probably the best scene in that entire movie because it shows the emotion that Yelena is going through that found family aspect. And I think that while it was explored a little bit in the movie, it could be explored a lot more. So I would keep that and expand upon it. As a little bonus, if this movie released in Phase 4, you could have Yelena appear here and there, maybe in Infinity War or Endgame. Not entirely sure how, I didn't exactly work that out, but I think that the tease at the end should still be the same. Maybe in Endgame you could have, well, I don't want to have a post-credit scene in Endgame, but somewhere down the line you could have a post-credit scene where Yelena is going after Hawkeye. I still want that to be the same. The fourth project in my reworked MCU Phase 4 is Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. This will still remain a movie. And to be honest, this movie will stay almost exactly the same. The only minor difference in the main part of the movie that I would change is have Michelle Yeoh explain that Ta Lo is a dimension, so it's not actually part of Earth, it's rather maybe a rift. For me personally, in my own version of MCU's multiverse, I would explain dimensions as little pockets between universes. So like little connection points that connect different universes together, like the Dark Dimension or the Ta Lo Dimension. I think that that would be really cool because as it is, Ta Lo is a little bit confusing to me, honestly. And so I think it would help just explain things and, start to hint at little things of the multiverse. You'll notice that at this point in time with the three projects, Captain America Brave New World, WandaVision, and Shang-Chi, I haven't really touched on the multiverse, and that's very intentional because with the first few projects of Phase 1 of the MCU, no one ever really talked about Infinity Stones. It wasn't until Captain America 1 and Thor 1, so we're getting there. The other major change I would make is actually to the credit scene. Shang-Chi has one of my favorite credit scenes in the entire MCU because it actually shows that there's some sort of Avengers team? Maybe? Question mark. And so the only thing I would change there is to make it explicit. I don't care if Bruce Banner in that scene says the Avengers are broken up. On the other hand, I also would not be mad if Bruce Banner says something like, well, we're getting the team back together. And you could even have Sam Wilson's Captain America at that point pop up and say, I'm working on recruiting a team. We want you to be part of it. I think that that's great. You should also keep the part of the 10 rings being important because I do believe that Kang will use them at a certain point. So keep that in there. But really, for the most part, start setting the scene. Start laying down groundwork for a new Avengers team. Doesn't have to be fully formed at this point. You can just have Bruce Banner, Captain Marvel, and Sam Wilson there recruiting Shang-Chi and Katie, if she wants to be on the Avengers, I guess. And just hint at, a future team building up. I think that would go a long way. The fifth project in my reworked MCU Phase 4 is Eternals. Now, this is an interesting one because honestly, guys, I don't care if it's a movie or a show. I've heard arguments for both sides. I've heard people say this would have been so much better if it were a show. I personally really do like the movie, and I know a lot of people don't. I don't care. It could be a movie, it could be a show. I think that either format would lend itself well to making a very good Eternals property. Few things I don't like about Eternals that I would change. I wouldn't make them so robotic. I don't think they're actual robots, but I think it's implied that they're closer to robots than actual people. I would just say that Arishem created them almost as flesh and blood kind of creatures. They don't have to be humans, obviously, but I think that the Eternals would benefit from just not being robots. That is just a personal gripe. Couple other things towards the end of the movie that I would change. Obviously, the big question in the MCU Phase 4 and Phase 5 is why is nobody talking about Tiamat? So my solution to that is maybe not have his entire head and upper torso sticking out of the ocean, but rather just maybe have a couple fingers sticking out so that people can kind of pass it off as maybe it's just a random mountain range, which is still weird, but it's a little less weird than having a giant god being sticking out of the ocean. It would at least make the fact that nobody's talking about it a little less conspicuous. Speaking of people not talking about things, I would not have Arishem just loom over the entirety of England and grab the Eternals from there. I would just have him teleport the Eternals to somewhere in space so that nobody sees it on Earth. And the final big change that I would make to Eternals is I would make Black Knight, Dane Whitman, a major character. He doesn't have to be the main character, but I think that he needs to use the Ebony Blade in this movie, and even he can fight in the ending. He could be the one to fight Crow, actually. I think that that would be a very satisfying ending, because I think that the Athena versus Crow fight, maybe not the most compelling part. So I would have Dane Whitman with the Ebony Blade fully formed as the Black Knight, or at least beginning to get into his powers and the blade, and then fighting Crow at the end. In terms of the ending with the credit scenes and setup, I would have the same post-credit scene with Dane Whitman and Mahershala Ali. I think that you should actually have Mahershala Ali show up as Blade, and instead of just, having Dane pick up the sword, I would have him at this point already know how to use the sword, and then it would be a quest to go and find Cersei. Maybe you could have that be the plot of Midnight Suns? Maybe? But at any rate, you want to hint at a team up here, because we are setting up the Midnight Suns with Black Knight and Blade. The other post-credit scene can be somewhat similar to the one with Star Fox and Pip the Troll, but basically, I want to set up Eternals 2, and I want it to have hints towards the multiverse, with Celestials coming into play, because, and this is maybe a tease to a future video I can make about Phase 5 and Phase 6, where I map it out just like I'm doing right now, but I want the Celestials to play a big part in Avengers Secret Wars, whether they're the villains of Avengers Secret Wars and they create Battleworld somehow, or whatever it is, I want them to be a big part. So I'm going to be setting up Eternals 2, and I want them to have multiversal ties. Next project up, number 6, would be Hawkeye, and I'm going to keep it as a 6-episode Disney Plus TV show. I think that there's a lot to explore that I wouldn't want to make Hawkeye a movie. I think that we can explore a lot more with the character in a show, but I'd make some changes. As you know, by the way, if you've seen my rewatch video, I really did enjoy Hawkeye, but there are a couple things I would change. First of all, I would make Jack Duquesne either not a character in this show or de-emphasize his character a lot, because it's very clear to me that nobody really bought into the fact that he was the real villain after a couple episodes, and it's very exceedingly obvious upon rewatch. So minimize Jack Duquesne's role, make Eleanor Bishop the main villain, and then have her be a henchman, and maybe have her even be taken out by Kingpin in episode 3 or episode 4, so that Kate Bishop has a motivation to fight Kingpin, who is the villain of episodes 5 and 6, and really of the entire show. I think that that would give the entire series some continuity. I would also have Echo be in there the entire time. I think that she's a strong character who wasn't really given enough to do in the show, and so I would either have her aligned with Kingpin until the very end, or have her maybe switch sides to Hawkeye's side at a certain point. But I think that she needs to be in the show the entire time to set her up as a very strong hero in the future. And instead of having Rogers the Musical as the credit scene, I want to set up the Young Avengers here, because I think the Young Avengers are going to play a big part in the future of the MCU, especially with Iron Lad, Reed Richards coming up. So I think that we're going to have a big Young Avengers setup with Hawkeye probably as the mentor as well, which is really cool. So Kate Bishop setting up the Young Avengers. I don't know what explicitly it would be, but maybe just a conversation between Clint and Kate talking about recruiting other young superheroes that they found with a database or something like that. Project number 7 is Moon Knight, and Moon Knight is going from a 6-episode Disney Plus series to a movie. One of the things I liked least about Moon Knight was that it felt very unfocused. I think that there was infinite potential with a project like Moon Knight with an actor like Oscar Isaac, but it needed to be focused up. So making it a movie will tighten up the plot immensely, I think. We are going to focus on Jake Lockley, and I think Jake Lockley will actually be the villain, because I think it would be so interesting to have the hero and the villain inhabit the same body in the same film. That's a really interesting concept to me. And I think that you could have Arthur Harrow still in there. Ethan Hawke did a great job, but he can be almost a secondary character working for Jake Lockley. And it's basically a mystery movie where Mark Spector and Stephen Grant have to overtake the third personality living in their body somehow. Really, I don't want any of this stuff about Amit, to be honest. I think you can keep Khonshu, and you can keep the part where Khonshu used Arthur Harrow as his previous avatar, but honestly, nothing about Amit. Just keep Khonshu. That's it. I also want to have a couple credit scenes here with Moon Knight. One of them is setting up Rama Tut to be the villain of the second season of Moon Knight, which I really hope will happen. Honestly, you don't even have to have a specific actor cast. You can just mention the name Rama Tut. People are not going to know what it means. They're going to go on the internet. People are going to do breakdowns, and we're going to be hinting towards Kang and the Kang Dynasty. The second post-credit scene I want to be setting up is Midnight Suns. I think before Moon Knight Season 2, we want to have a Midnight Suns adventure, and I think that this post-credit scenes can tease the existing team of Blade, Black Knight, and now Moon Knight, who are going to investigate something interesting going on with a werewolf. Wonder what that could be. And finally, to round out this part 2 of fixing the MCU Phase 4, I have Spider-Man No Way Home as the 8th project, and I'm going to keep it as a movie. And honestly, almost everything about Spider-Man No Way Home is going to stay the same. The only thing I would really change here is just to have Doctor Strange start to sense that the multiverse is beginning to crack open. So even before Peter uses the spell, or rather Peter asks Doctor Strange to use the spell, I want a scene where Doctor Strange is talking to Wong about how the fact that there's something weird going on with the multiverse, and he's not entirely sure what it is, and then Spider-Man No Way Home is beginning to tear it open just a little bit, enough for these villains to come in. And then the post-credit scene, it could be a tease to Doctor Strange 2 like it was. It can just be a trailer. But I mean, I think it'd be fun to have an actual scene teasing Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness as well. And so, guys, as we wrap up this video, as we wrap up part 2, those are the first 8 projects in my revamped MCU Phase 4. I hope you found those interesting. And I also wanted to give a few takeaways from these first 8 projects, like where we are in the state of play in the MCU after watching these 8 projects in my hypothetical universe. Because I think it's important that we have a certain baseline of where the audience knows we're at after watching Spider-Man No Way Home. So, just to recap, the order that I would go in is Captain America Brave New World as a movie, WandaVision as a show, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings as a movie, Eternals either as a movie or a show, doesn't really matter to me, Hawkeye as a show, Moon Knight as a movie, and Spider-Man No Way Home as a movie, with Black Widow moving to the MCU Phase 3. What I want to set up through these 8 projects as we are halfway through the MCU Phase 4 is a few things. First of all, I want to begin to form an Avengers team. I hope that was clear through my explanation of the different projects, that an Avengers team is starting to form. We are starting to form actually a bunch of disparate teams. So we're starting to form an Avengers team, we're starting to form a Midnight Suns team, and we're starting to have the inklings of a Young Avengers team. I think that it's really important to explicitly talk about these groups as they are forming rather than just hinting at a bunch of different characters all over the place. I think that's super important. I also want to tease the Celestials as a big threat because I believe that the Celestials will be the big threat in Avengers Secret Wars, in my version at least. I know that has nothing to do with what happens in the comics, but for my version at least, as somebody who has minimal comic book knowledge, I think that it would be really interesting to have the Celestials be a part of Battleworld and Secret Wars. So that's something I want to tease as well. And finally, here's a big difference between my beginning of Phase 4 and the actual beginning of Phase 4. The actual beginning of Phase 4 tore open the multiverse almost immediately with Loki in the 3rd project. I don't want to tear open the multiverse actually until Kang Dynasty. And so what we're doing here is we're slowly building up the break in the multiverse because I think it would be so much more poignant if the multiverse tore itself open in Kang Dynasty. Because think about it. It's not like we had all 6 Infinity Stones in Iron Man 2, which would be the 3rd project in the Infinity Saga. We had them slowly interspersed throughout the MCU with hints of Thanos throughout. And that's what I want to do here with the Multiverse Saga. That's one of the big problems I think that the Multiverse Saga as it is that it really unleashed the Kang and it unleashed the multiverse way too quickly. So what I'm doing here is we're having different projects like WandaVision so far and Spider-Man No Way Home hint that the multiverse is beginning to destabilize. But we're not explicitly going to have Kang yet, and we're not explicitly going to have the multiverse broken up yet. That's going to come later. That's a key difference in my Phase 4. And guys, that'll about do it for this video. That'll about do it for part 2 of fixing the MCU Phase 4. Stay tuned on the YouTube channel for part 3 as I discuss the final 8 projects and my hypothetical MCU Phase 4. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed me just taking a stab at what I would do. Again, I have to reiterate, with hindsight, because I understand that with a pandemic and with production delays and with all sorts of different things coming in and out with Disney hierarchy shakeups, that Kevin Feige probably didn't get to make the Phase 4 that he really wanted to, and he made some mistakes. I think there's no denying that from most of us. And so this is me just looking back with hindsight, with full creative control and saying, what would I have done differently? I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments down below. Stay tuned for part 3, and I will see you guys in the next one.